it's kind of meta. So part of my legacy is building a business that helps people better manage their legacies.
Welcome to Hindsight. I'm Dave Diebold, and in every episode, we sit down with remarkable individuals to explore the experiences that, looking back, changed everything. Let's dive in. Welcome, and so delighted to have you join today.
Well, thank you.
Especially being, it's a long weekend. I'm dragging you in on a stat holiday. This is an area that's quite near and dear to my heart, as you know. And I really would like to explore a little bit more about the notion of corporate trusts, and you've got a lot of experience and knowledge to share. And so for the benefit of the audience, I really want to give them your view into the world. Got lots of questions, as I invariably do, but I'm hoping this would be more conversational and not much like a tennis match, because we do have a lot of stuff to share. We've mutual clients over the years. And so knowing you're extremely busy, both in work and out of work, why don't I start off with what got you started on your journey?
In legal services generally, or the trust piece? Tell me where to start.
Well, it really depends on, obviously I would love to get into the world of trust, but you started down the path with your own law firm, and invariably you ended up going into the trust area. And I don't want to lead the conversation in that I believe it was an area of very underserviced and huge opportunity upside. And when I look at how we as professional service advisors provide advice, I see that being the core area where our value add and our ability to take advice in going forward extends beyond just the separation agreement or the corporate restructuring or whatever the legal issue is. Invariably, it comes down to working with people. So if you want to talk about the law practice, absolutely. I'd love to hear about that.
Well, the genesis would have been, so I had a boutique law practice primarily on the North Shore, although we had clients all over British Columbia. And we did wills and estates, family, and alternative dispute resolution, so mediation, arbitration, and I did something called parenting coordination. So that's for post-divorce, high-conflict parents that are attempting to co-parent.
Sounds like light reading.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's not low impact. So as an estate practitioner, a certain percentage of people could use a professional executor, professional trustee. So those people might be, maybe they didn't have children, and maybe they don't really have an appropriate family member that they want to use potentially as their executor or power of attorney. Maybe they've got a blended family. Maybe they've had second or third marriages, and they want someone independent to step in that's not on sort of either branch's side of the family. Maybe there's a disabled beneficiary, so maybe somebody's got a developmental disability or a significant mental health issue, and there's going to be a long-term trust. Maybe the family's just really high conflict. As we're increasingly international, sometimes all the children are in the U.S., for example. And if you have a Canadian situs estate, there's complexity of having a U.S. Resident executor because the estate is deemed to be U.S. resident where the executor resides. So you potentially have IRS implications. So there's a variety of reasons why people might consider a professional trust company either executor, power of attorney, or trustee. And the big banks offer that service. But one of the things about the big banks is that their business model is really higher net worth and what would be ultra high net worth people. So the banks are defining that currently as generally $30 million Canadian of investable assets. That's what they're defining as a higher net worth client. So their business model is somewhat that the trust services are a conduit to either retain or obtain new clients in that sort of very small echelon. I think there's about 12,000 families approximately in Canada that are estimated to be in that echelon of investments. And the larger banks are really interested in that. For the vast majority of people that may own a home, have some modest investments, if you're going to go to one of the larger financial institutions, the trust services are going to be somewhat hefty, expensive. And the other piece is the banks, they're largely run out of Toronto. They have to have systems and processes in place to ensure compliance and things like that. But in practice, clients can experience processes that are a little bit slow. There's a lot of turnover of staff. It's difficult to run a large organization to be responsive to individual clients. And so not only can services be expensive, but the experience of clients can be slow and not sort of as responsive as they might like to be. So there's room for independent trust companies, and by independent trust companies, those are companies that are not affiliated with a larger financial institution. And so what we have is, number one,
You should we will be putting a bio on you, but we
Okay.
at Heritage Trust.
Correct.
Okay.
So I am the president of Heritage Trust, which is a independent trust company.
And co-founder.
And co-founder,
Yes.
correct. Co-founder of Heritage Trust, which is a independent trust company operating currently in British Columbia, although we have plans to expand throughout Western Canada. So there is room for independence. So number one, we take smaller trusts than some of the larger banks will take. So sometimes, I remember I had a client where it was a lady, she was a widow, she had a modest condo, modest savings, and she had a Down syndrome son, and the trust was going to be, I think, around $300,000 to $500,000, depending on how long she lived. Well, none of the banks were interested in taking that trust. She didn't have another family member that she felt appropriate, and so she wanted an entity that was going to serve her son, but there really wasn't an option available to her. So that showed me, as her estate planning lawyer, that there was definitely a gap in the market for people that needed it. And the other piece is with the banks, they are primarily in the wealth management business, and you can argue that there's somewhat of a conflict of interest in that as a fiduciary, we're supposed to act in the best interests of clients and only think about what's in their interest. We're not supposed to have, I guess, a personal interest in any decisions we make. And there's somewhat of a conflict in the large banks because they, of course, have wealth management arms. So they're going to, if they've got clients that are, say, with an independent investment firm, so maybe it's Odlin Brown, maybe it's Asante, maybe it's Nicola Wealth. If you appoint Royal Trust, invariably Royal Trust is going to move those investments over to Dominion Securities, for example. Or if it's Scotia, they'll go to Scotia Capital or whatever it might be. So the benefit of an independent is we're very agnostic in respect of where they go. So if you want to maintain long-term family relationships, certainly we'll maintain those as long as they're doing a good job. But also, we have no financial incentive to choose any particular financial institution. We just want somebody that's going to do a good job, get expected returns, and charge a reasonable management fee. And whether that is Dominion Securities or Odlin Brown, we're neutral as long as the client's having their needs met. So that's another benefit of the independence. So as an estate planning lawyer, I had worked with some independents, but because there were so few, I also saw that there was a need in the market. And I take a sip of water. One thing that we had is experience working with high conflict families. So we had done a lot of divorce. I'd acted as a parenting coordinator, so a lot of high conflict individuals that had personality disorders and/or full-on mental health diagnoses, or just for sort of garden variety high conflict individuals. We were used to restructuring and assisting families in high conflict. So it was, okay, we could provide this independent, more cost-effective and neutral service, but also we're not afraid of complexity. And even today, it's not even necessarily that the families are high conflict, but occasionally some of the larger banks will decline to take estates that have what they perceive as undue risk, whereas maybe we are comfortable in managing complexity. So an example is a gentleman passed away recently who owns 10 properties, and the properties would be, I don't know how to frame this, they would be challenging properties to manage in terms of the nature of them, the maintenance level, and the tenants in them would be a more challenging fact pattern, and a very large Big Five bank trust company, and also one of the properties burned down subsequent to the death, and one of the Big Five trust companies said, we're feeling that this demographic of tenants is beyond what we really want to deal with. So in fact, it's actually a fairly large estate. It's 10 properties in the Lower Mainland, but we are comfortable taking more complexity, potentially more risk. So we still make sure everything's obviously insured. We use high-level legal counsel. We use high-level tax counsel. We are working hand in hand with the municipality to deal with immediate health, safety, and hazmat and fire concerns, which are immediate. But we're not afraid to sort of roll up our sleeves and do that. So there absolutely is a role in the market for smaller companies that are okay with more complexity, and that's what we offer.
There seems to be this, because we've known and worked with each other for many, many years, and there seems to be this journey where you are running two practices or two businesses in parallel, and then all of a sudden the trust has begun to hockey stick, if I can use the Canadiana reference.
That would be correct.
And having looked at and journeyed through the regulatory environment, that mind shift, that decision to kind of let go of one and move into strictly the trust, I imagine, wasn't an easy decision, but one that was like, yeah, I have to focus my energies here. I see the benefits of it, like that you're going from, well, personally, like I'm an executor listed on, honestly, I don't know how many estates. I have to go back to my archives and check to see how many, but if I get hit by a bus, there's almost a dozen estates that are in trouble. So you look back and you say, well, we need to come up with a better system for this. Without, again, that's an unregulated, almost gray area where it's me listed personally, but and I don't know how much of this I have to scrub out and get me not in trouble. Don't want to get in trouble with BCFSA, but the idea of professionalizing this need with this aging demographic with this massive wealth transfer. But what was that pivotal moment where you knew, like, I need to just focus on one and not run two in parallel?
Well, I'd like to say it was more strategic than it was, but so I think you referenced, so we're regulated by the BC Financial Services Authority.
Yep.
And as it should be, it's quite onerous to become a financial institution. So you have to do a complex application. They obviously do quite rigorous due diligence on the individuals that are starting it, the business plan. You have to put up a fairly significant amount of capital, and you have to have, currently in British Columbia, you have to have 0.5% of capital as a percentage of your assets under administration. And so because particularly the value of our real estate is so high, you can get into the hundreds of millions of assets under administration, like actually quite quickly. And so that's capital intensive. So what happened at the beginning is it was quite expensive to start, and then the running costs of it, you have to have, full IT, staff, insurance, an independent paid board, a full independent audit every year. I mean, the burn rate is a 6-figure burn rate, even if you're not even servicing one client yet. And what happened is at the beginning, it's a strange business in that you get appointed, so you have what's called a wills bank, but you don't actually get paid until you start working. So it's a little bit of a strange business in that we don't get paid until people actually pass away or become
So
disabled.
let's work through the math on that, just for the benefit of the viewers and listeners.
Right.
If you accept a client and there is $100 million worth of real estate that is accepted as a client, but they haven't died yet, right? So you're unless there's some power of attorney arrangement, I imagine that the triggering event is on their passing, and then you have to step in, but you've accepted them as a client. So I would imagine if they have 10 years where they're trucking along, at what point on $100 million do you have to have 0.5% sitting in the bank account?
So that's a good question. So we don't need it until the euphemism in the industry is called the estate falls in, and that means someone has either become incapable, and so we're stepping in as a trustee or power of attorney, or someone's passed away. And
So we have to wait until that triggering event, or they're in a round.
Correct.
Okay.
So what you have is a lot of upfront expense, and then a very long time. I mean, we hope our clients live long, healthy, happy lives. And so many people, they may be 70, healthy, active, 70, and healthy, active 7-year-old could easily live, and we hope they do, well into their mid, even late 90s. So even someone who's 70, we might be waiting 25, 30 years till they pass away. So but we also got appointed right away in a lot of conflictual estates. So we did have some estates that fell in quickly, but we also got appointed in trusteeships and some estates where there was a lot of litigation, and either by consent or by court order, people got removed and we got put in. So at the beginning, we had a lot of expense, but our revenue, sadly, was quite modest. So I, with a busy law practice, my co-founder, Brian Doherty, who's also an accountant, busy.
Whom I've met several times.
You've met, who also has quite a busy accounting practice. So we continued to work in our professional practices, and this would be our side of the desk gig, I guess you would say. And then what happened is it was like a hockey stick in that it trickled in, and then one day it sort of hit and it became very, very busy. And last year I was continuing to run both businesses, but it was becoming increasingly challenging to have the bandwidth to do both. And then one of my paralegals who had been with me for well over 10 years decided to switch jobs and very sadly gave her notice, and what became a busy thing became a, I guess, crisis situation. And that
Hence the comment around not so strategic.
Right.
Yes,
so
okay.
we had sort of 4.5 paralegals, but even just losing one, given the volumes of work, was going to be an immediate issue. And so what I did is it forced a revisiting of what to do. And so I was very lucky to partner with a very classy and high-quality firm in British Columbia called Lindsay Kenny. And I've merged my practice into Lindsay Kenny.
Yeah.
And that happened effective September 1st. And I'm in somewhat of a consulting role. I'm still a practicing lawyer, but the majority of my time is now spent running a Heritage Trust and our fiduciary roles, which are executor, power of attorney, and trustee.
I imagine that your experience, your legal experience, coupled with troubling estates, in that you have possibly some disgruntled beneficiaries or beneficiaries that don't get along with each other. I imagine that skill set comes in handy. I wouldn't even know where to begin getting sued as the executor or trustee of an estate. Do you want to walk us through your views on how tough that can be?
On getting sued. Well, we haven't been sued yet, although we will. I mean, it's sort of a...
I'm not foreshadowing. I can't imagine there's not family disgruntlements.
It will happen at some point, because if you're a fiduciary, that is I think we like to joke as lawyers, the Supreme Court of Canada never saw a fiduciary they didn't love. And so a fiduciary, in lay terms, is the highest duty you can owe at law. And you basically have to do a good job and always act in their best interests, and by extension not have a conflict of interest. But you're as a professional, you're held to a very high standard,
Yes.
as you should be. And invariably in complex estates that professional trust companies are put in, there could be loss, litigation, conflict, God forbid, errors. It is a fraught, complex area.
Mm-hmm.
And so we, at some point, I'm sure will be in the crosshairs. But what you do is you try to be really prudent risk managers. And, it's not actually super rocket science. Like if somebody passes away, there are pretty established sort of methods and procedures you do to mitigate that risk. And one of the things is obviously having a good technical background, being highly organized, proactive and transparent communication with beneficiaries and all stakeholders, and hiring really good counsel as required. So making sure we have top legal advice, top accounting advice, and specialized advice. So it's not uncommon that we get estates with serious insolvency issues, for example. Sometimes we'll bring in bankruptcy and insolvency specialists. I'm just trying to think about all the things like, there might be Waste Management Act, environmental issues. We'll bring in experts in that regard. We have professional property managers. We've had estates where they've owned extremely valuable art and very fragile, valuable art. So we bring in specialists in that in terms of valuation, insurance, moving, storing. It sort of just depends on that. So we are sort of project managers. And yes, we have many years of experience in legal, tax, and estate administration, but we also have the wherewithal to understand we're dealing with a specialized issue, we're going to bring in experts as required. And that actually is what makes it a really fun, interesting business, because we've dealt with running medical practices, we've dealt with complex commercial properties, we've all different kinds of businesses. We've dealt with trustees of major birth injuries. We've dealt with people with extremely complex mental health and substance issues, just garden variety family fighting. I'm just trying to think about all the incredibly interesting things. I was saying to someone, I was at a wedding reception last night, and I was saying, if there weren't such privacy issues, actually it would be an amazing reality show, because every estate has its own unique facts and family story. And, we had one estate where the condominiums had been empty for 20 years. Like we ended up, so somebody had passed away, the beneficiaries were offshore, then and I'm not sure what happened, but they never administered the estate. Then those beneficiaries passed away, and so tier 3 beneficiaries have passed, are now
trying
there.
to find them all.
And so no tax returns been filed for 20 years. It's quite something. We're trying to find the social insurance number of the first deceased, which is a challenge. And these properties had been sitting vacant for 20 years.
I won't pretend to understand the breadth of examples, but I would say, where do you see the trends going? Like you and I, we both have our FEA, and we both understand that the trends around aging demographics and that transition of family businesses, like you mentioned, medical practice, like it's not just when someone dies, there's businesses that have to continue to keep operating and keep working. And it's not like you are a medical practitioner, operator, you know how to operate, but you have to find someone with the skill set to keep the business going to the extent that it needs to continue to operate. It's not just a piece of land that sits there. Someone's got to manage the property. So you're right, you are kind of managing, you're basically overseeing everything and making sure that the portfolio is being managed by someone that understands how to manage the portfolio based on the risk profile of a beneficiary group. Someone's going to manage the operating business, find a CEO that can come in there and operate the business, and then set up a proper governance structure to the extent there isn't one already. There's just a ream of issues, but that trend, like where do you see the trend going? I love the fact that you can customize the service. That's great. Like, I mean, I've worked for the big institution across the street, and if it doesn't fit within the form of what they do, then it doesn't work. It doesn't. You can't put it in the computer. That won't work. They won't customize, and I get that. They can be really good in a certain environment, but customizing the services. And when we look at the demographic of the transition of wealth, that over the next 10 years, 2/3 of private businesses in BC got to go somewhere.
And most people have done no planning.
Or, yes, we've talked about that on a previous discussion, and it's quite scary when you think about there's so much pressure put on the advisors to continue the status quo because I don't want to deal with it today. And so you end up almost controlling it from the grave based on mom and dad's wishes. And the kids, maybe their nose are bent out of joint because they don't want to deal with mom and dad's business because it's a sore point. And they just want to continue their lifestyle the way it is. So that I'm putting more emphasis on that. But where do you see the trends as it affects this hockey stick? Where do you see the main area coming in?
Well, I'm sure you're familiar with the statistic, but there's roughly $1 trillion of wealth that's transferring in Canada. So the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in human history is happening. And in our country, roughly, it's very estimated around $1 trillion as the baby boomers are starting to pass away. And so there's an enormous amount of wealth transferring. And then also the complexity of families. People are living longer. They are living longer, potentially incapable. People having second, third, later marriages. So that's more complexity in families. So it's, number one, a significant transfer of wealth. Number two, people are living longer and are going to need assistance with their finances or their health care. A human has to be a representative for health care, by the way. Only a human being is allowed to do that under any of the provinces in British Columbia. But a professional company can be the attorney for finances. So it's complex families, people living longer, a very large transfer of wealth. And the large financial institutions absolutely provide a service, but again, they're more skewed to higher net worth clients. Although we do have clients that are large as well, and I'll talk to you about that. But the big banks, if you're a higher net worth client and you already have significant investments inside one of the big 5 bank investment arms, one of those big 5 trust companies will likely make you a reasonable offer because they want to keep your business.
Of course.
Right? So you kind of get their A team, you get the best rates, and often it will be the right solution for a client. But there are some very large clients in British Columbia where, number one, it's primarily real estate, so they're not going to get those discounts, or they have significant investments with an independent investment company that's not affiliated, or there are actually a fair amount of people that are just allergic to the larger financial institutions. I think we all have our frustrations with sometimes the bureaucracy and the service levels of, I know that there's lots of good people there that do their very best, but, they can be sort of a little rigid in their...
Less customization.
Correct,
to meet the
and
needs.
so I even find as a business owner, sometimes I find it challenging. So there are a certain percentage of people that just don't want... They may have, $10 million that Nesbitt burns, but they're just allergic to having BMO because they want, or BMO Trust because they perceive they'll be better served with a check and a balance of an independent that's independent of their investments. And so they still want to appoint an independent. It really just depends on your facts and what the options are available to you based on your facts. But
I get the... Similar to my line of work, if there was if Methanex decided, hey, Manny Elliott, come do our audit, I'd be like, no, we can't do that. We're not set up to handle that. We would. That's where there's a place for the bigger institution, and they can make it work, sophisticated, coordinated way, and relatively cost effective. But that ability to be customized, if you own real estate in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver, you're already in the 7-figure in terms of estate size. And if your kids are not involved, or if they're non-resident, because that non-resident is a major issue as it relates to the cross-border reporting, the tax planning. Again, my line of work, I come across that all the time. So yeah, what would you have done differently? Like, you've gone down this path. I don't know if maybe you could have done it differently. It sounds pretty ideal that you had the ability to work a law practice and help feed the trust practice along the way. You had a really strong and supportive business partner to help you along the way, who's quite knowledgeable in the area of tax and accounting. You guys complement each other like it's the perfect environment. I look at it like as a garden environment. It's got sun, it's got rain, it's got good soil. Let's just watch it grow. But it's also extremely regulated. And that part irks me a little. I see it's there to protect the public. I get it. But sometimes it can be such a massive barrier to entry and very costly to get the right people in this environment. But would you have changed it, approached it a different way? Would you have timed it differently?
So like, we're having fun, and it's growing nicely, and we've got a good team. So I actually we're quite happy with the way the business is going. And I find that I find it sort of has the best parts of what practicing law was, in that you meet interesting people, you're learning all the time, you're solving problems, you're helping people. And those are the things I loved about legal practice, and absolutely that's there with the trust company. So I wouldn't change much, other than I wish I would have done it maybe 5 or even 10 years earlier. And I think that's because of the lead time.
Just to build up the hockey
Correct.
stick. Yeah,
And
good
so
point.
if that hockey stick had started earlier, I would have been younger to enjoy it. But, I think those barriers to entry were daunting, and I wanted to do it for a long time, but it seemed overwhelming in terms of the complexity and the amount of funds.
I always am just in awe of, I don't know how you do it, because there's the family side of it, there's the law practice, there's the trust. You've written books, like you're out there doing a lot of public speaking. I don't know where you find the time. I know you're very good about managing your time, and that's obviously a testament to your discipline in getting stuff done. I just don't know how you do it.
So I don't know that I manage my time that amazing, but I am organized, and I think that came from years of running a busy practice. If you're not organized, things are going to start to go awry very quickly. So I think that skill set is there. But I think, what is it? I wouldn't change what I did. I would have done it earlier. And I think it's a very fun, interesting business. And, I'm not saying this to flatter the regulator, but I actually like the regulator.
Good.
Yeah, so the BC Financial Services Authority, they're...
Otherwise, you'd be in the long line of work.
True, yeah. But I actually like the regulator.
Good.
They're nice people. I feel like they are partners with us. Does that make sense? Like, I don't feel that it's conflictual. I feel that they are partners with us towards a mutual goal in us being successful and meeting the needs of and protecting clients, which of course is our
Good.
goal. And so I feel that it works well. And in fact, it seemed daunting, but then once we started, it wasn't it's like everything, it wasn't as bad as what, it's like you just got to take that messy first step, and then once you're in, you realize it's not as bad. But like, how did I do it? I think, like life, anything, it's luck meets preparation. So I had, worked hard as a professional, tried to be a good lawyer, take good care of my clients. So I had, good professional relationships and stuff like that. But, there was luck in that one of my friends from law school, we ended up being baby lawyers together. We summered and articled, and were associates at a firm that was Ladner Downs, that then became Borden Ladner Gervais. And her name is Corinne Zimmer, and she's now a very successful partner at Fasken Martineau Dumoulin. And she ended up being sort of like one of the top financial services solicitors in BC. So when I had this idea, I phoned my friend Corinne that, I had known for years, and I said, is starting a trust company hard? And she said, in fact, it's involved. And, and I said, well, do you know how to do this? And she said, well, funnily enough, I'm probably one of a small handful of lawyers in BC that actually has this background, because she, in fact, had acted as lead counsel for a number of credit unions and had very strong relationships with the regulator at that time. It was called FICOM, and had been, I think, the corporate secretary and had done all kinds of regulation and acted for insurance companies. So the BCFSA regulates credit unions, insurance companies, trust companies, mortgage brokers, realtors. I think that's it, but quite a few entities. Yep. So she happened to have the technical knowledge and the relationships. So that was just pure luck. So I worked hard, had an idea, and then...
Had a connection.
Hardworking people get lucky.
Well, I'd say that, yeah, you got to be good at what you do, otherwise the luck runs out. But, okay, well, knowing you've come down this path, looking at someone like myself, I'm a professional, I have lots of clients. What advice would you give to someone like myself, or to lawyers, or to professionals out there that are trying their best to help navigate client issues? And what your lens on this, what advice would you give to people like myself?
Well, change, as we know, is coming very quickly with AI and how fast it's evolving. Like, I notice, so I use it as a tool, and I have noticed, even like in the last couple of months, the caliber and sophistication and quality is exponentially improved. So I can't even imagine how fast that's going to change. And I think in the legal sphere, I think I'm concerned because a lot of the roles of junior lawyers or training are things like document review, due diligence, research, and I think a lot of those tasks, if you can ring fence AI to protect client confidentiality, a lot of those tasks are going to be done very quickly and very high quality by AI. And so I'm concerned about what this is going to look like in terms of the business model and the training of lawyers, because the senior practitioners, like, my ability to use AI for complex legal problem solving is predicated on the fact that I actually have 25 years of technical knowledge. So if it hallucinates something or it goes on a crazy tangent, I've had those 25 years to know that is completely wrong. And you get lulled into complacency because you can get if you put in good input questions, you can get quite high quality outputs. But every once in a while, there's just a wildly wrong output.
We've seen it.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think you have to have the seniority and the experience to be able to use the tool effectively. So I think in law and accounting, I think the thing is the robots are coming. Nobody denies that. And a lot of the rote work, a lot of the bread and butter work, a lot of the junior work is going to be completely automated. And what's that going to mean for our businesses?
Our training model changes entirely.
It does. And so I think we're going to have to rethink what this means for the business model of law, and what this is going to mean in terms of training juniors, and what providing legal or accounting or other professional services as a knowledge worker, what's that going to mean? The highest echelon of the profession is going to remain. So in fact, us being I think we're Gen Xers, kind of old, not boomers, but I think for us...
Well, boomers are now dying, so I hope I'm not in that category. Yes.
I believe we're actually the exact same age. I won't say how old. We're Gen Xers. So I will.
I think you're correct.
I'll decline to say how old we are. Yeah. But we're at a stage where I don't think AI is an existential threat. But I have 2 children in their 20s who are brand new baby lawyers, and I'm one of them's going to go in the asset management practice group of a white shoe New York law firm, and I'm very interested to see what the structural changes are going to be there. So what would I say to practitioners? That I think the thing about the pivot to the trust company was I had the idea, it's interesting, and I'm glad I did it because it has all the things I loved about being a lawyer, but I was able to pivot because of all those years of experience, and it is a business that is going to be AI resistant in that, a professional executor managing warring siblings with a complex portfolio of real estate and running business assets. I think
We're definitely not there yet.
we can use AI to assist us in terms of technical information, but that project management role of complexity, I don't see happening anytime tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I think as business owners of professional services firms, still remaining in those traditional roles, I think there's going to have to be a rethink and a pivot in terms of what this is going to mean logistically, economically, and from an HR perspective.
So looking forward in this AI protected business that you've set yourself into, I could get into a whole other podcast on AI, and I don't. That's not the point. Today was to explore this journey in trust businesses and professional trust businesses. My final question. This has been amazing, by the way. What legacy do you want to leave?
Well, that's an interesting question. So,
Not that you're going anywhere. We're the same
yeah.
age, but what legacy do you want to leave in this business? It's your own business.
yeah, that's interesting. So I think that goes to, there's a philosopher named Stephen Cave who wrote a book about the sort of narratives or myths that humans tell ourselves. So we are, there's another sort of physicist named Brian Cox, not the guy on Succession, he's a PhD in astrophysics, and he says, how do we as humans manage the fact that we're fragile, finite beings in a infinite, eternal universe?
And the physicist that goes on television quite a bit?
That's
he's
right.
great. He's
He is
fantastic.
great.
Yeah.
And it's like, what do we do about our inherent mortality? So here we are, smack in midlife, and what Stephen Cave would say is that the mortality narratives are, how do we handle this mortality conundrum? So some people just try not to die. I think there's a guy that's trying to keep himself alive forever or whatever. He's
Good luck with that.
Interesting guy.
Yeah.
Then there's people that believe in the resurrection narrative, and that we may die, but we're coming back, whether through divine intervention or technology. I think Walt Disney is freeze-dried or whatever he is. I think he's thinking positive. And then there's the soul narrative, so maybe more of a Buddhist perspective, and that some essential part of us will live on. And then the fourth narrative is legacy. So I may be facing imminent death. It's going to happen quite quickly, but I can leave something behind. So in fact, we're not going to continue to live, but something that matters to us. So what does that mean? Does it mean a child? Does it mean a business? Does it mean a movement? Does it mean something cultural? And I think for us, we both have children, so certainly our legacy is the memories and the family that we leave behind, and hopefully they're happy, productive people fulfilling their potential. But also this business has absolutely, it's kind of meta, because it's a business about preserving legacy, but it's also kind of my legacy as well, which is all these years of working allows me to do it. And I don't know if I told you this, but our family had a failed succession, which affected our family, which was my grandfather was the owner of a quite successful business called Big and Tall Men's Stores.
I've heard of that.
And he died suddenly in a plane crash in his late 40s, intestate, without a will. I don't think he was planning to, like one of the many business owners that's so busy they had deferred their estate planning. And the succession as a result of that lack of planning didn't go well. And it's a sad story. My dad ended up estranged from his family until he died. And I only met my father's family after his death, and it was basically a failed succession that caused a very sad division. And so I've seen the ramifications of things when they're not done well. So part of my legacy is building a business that helps people better manage their legacies.
Well said. Thank you very much for joining today. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
And I will be having you back on the show if that's okay.
Well, thanks, Dave. I'd love to. We can talk about one of the many technical things we know about.
Nicole Garton, Heritage Trust. Have a great afternoon.
Great, thanks.
That's a wrap on today's episode of Hindsight. If there's one takeaway from today, it's that every challenge, every misstep, and every breakthrough adds to the wisdom that shapes our future decisions. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might appreciate these insights. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and don't forget to have fun in your journey.